This is Alexa Linton, and you're listening to the Whole Horse Podcast. I'm coming to you from the Cowichan Valley on beautiful Vancouver Island in Canada, and I'm excited to be bringing amazing instructors from around the world to share their knowledge about all the ways that we can keep ourselves and our horses well and happy, and about some of the cutting edge techniques, training, and different aspects that are coming into the horse industry and changing it from within. I'm so excited you're here, and I'm excited about the times that we live in and the shifts that are happening in the horse industry before our eyes. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. It's Alexa Linton here, and you're on the Whole Horse Podcast, and we're in season 3, and this is episode 47. And today on the podcast, I am welcoming back 2 favorite guests, and they are going to be teaming up to share with us about some very, very cool things. Welcome back, Josh, Nichol, and Elisse Miki.
Hey, how's it going?
Thanks for having me back, Alexa.
You are so welcome. They are over on the Lower Mainland right now in the same room, which is awesome. And you two are joining me because, well, I'm not sure I'm allowed to talk necessarily about the exact thing, but these two have collaborated on something that's also really near and dear to my heart. And pardon the pun, but today is all about the heart. We're diving into how horses relate through the heart and how that relates to horsemanship. And this has been something for me that I've been, sort of exploring for a long time. And I'm loving how you two are collaborating around this. So would either of you like to kind of give a little bit of an overview of what you've been up to, what you've been working on?
Yeah, it's been actually really cool. Elisse, in her own work, has been doing a bunch of really cool work on the heart and on what's actually going on there, which she'll share a little bit about in a minute here. But and then she actually came and watched one of my clinics, and in her mind was really in that space when she came, and then seeing how I was talking about the horses and how I was working with them, she was just putting together all these connections. From my perspective, I didn't really know a lot about what she was saying until she started explaining stuff to me, but it was super cool how there was these amazing connections between what she was discovering about the heart and then how I was working in the training. So it really created a great conversation. We started by talking about a bunch of stuff and then realizing that, we wanted to do more with it. So it was pretty cool.
Amazing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, in Josh's words, exactly that. I was studying the equine osteopathy at the time, and we were going in depth with the heart work, as you know, and started making all these connections. And when I did go to Josh's clinic, it was so obvious that the reasoning behind a lot of his horsemanship was sort of based off that anatomy that I was learning about, and that the two things really were synchronistically working together. And I didn't know if he knew that specifically or not, which is why I approached him, and here we are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I've been reading some of your work, and I am really loving where you're going, and I'm excited today to unpack this a little bit. I know there's so much detail to it, but I hope that we can kind of touch on some of the cornerstones of what you've been discovering as far as the connections here. And I know that the listeners are also going to be really excited to hear, how, you shared before we started, Josh, this sense of how so often we get into this conundrum where, the body worker comes out and like fixes things on the horse, and then we go back into riding or training and things break down, and then we go back to the therapist, and there's this constant kind of back and forth. And as a equine therapist, I see this constantly, and it's highly frustrating. You often kind of feel like you're putting band-aids on things and just hoping for the best, sending them back out into the fray. So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing differently with this understanding of things.
Well, my work predominantly is based on a sense and a feeling. And in my conversations with Elisse, in explaining the heart and the frequency the heart's giving off, it's become very clear to me that there's an actual science to the feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I talk a lot about the space that you're in when you're around a horse, and there's just a lot to what the heart's giving off and being able to feel them. So I found that when you are in the proper resonance with a horse, their bodies work differently, and when you're not, they don't work right. So from a needs perspective, working with the needs of a horse, which there's mind, space, and pressure, these are all parts of what a horse needs to excel and feel safe and calm. There's a frequency inside of all of those when the horse is at peace, and that turns all the tension off, which then allows their body to work correctly. So first of all, we have to learn what it means to meet those needs, and that's a whole thing in itself. And then the second part is understanding how then the body works correctly, and trying to, and that is what therapists are trying to do, but really in my mind, that is exactly what we should be trying to do in our training as well. And so then that's kind of changed the style of training that I've done, because I don't have a discipline focus anymore. I really am just trying to focus on two main points. And the first is bringing peace to the horses. And secondly is getting them to use their bodies in a way that's correct to their physiology. And then we have a content animal that's using their body right. And now that's where we can match the therapy and the training actually work hand in hand.
And tagging on to that, when he's talking about peace in the body, what we are discovering now is that a lot of the reason that the horses do feel the peace within their body is because they have that heart frequency that is so much more sensitive and larger than ours. So to find peace in the body, it's pretty much emanated every direction out of their body, right? So this is something that we're going to dive into today, but it's important to understand that the heart really is sort of like that centerpiece of the animal and of us, and the energy coming out of it is something that is reflected in everything that we do and that they do and interpret from us.
Yes, yes. And being sort of osteopathically minded, like Elise, the heart is understood as like the main fulcrum of the whole body, the whole system, which is, sort of denotes, like underlines this importance of this particular organ. We don't always think about it that way. So Elise, would you go into a little bit about, what the heart, what brings, obviously it's pumping blood, and it's keeping us alive in so many ways. In our sort of talk beforehand, we talked about a little bit about self-preservation. Going a little bit deeper into that, what does the heart really mean for a horse?
So there's a few levels to that. I'm going to start just anatomically, as you're saying, that it is the center of the body, in the sense that we cannot live without a heart pumping blood in that precise timing regularly, right? Conversely, though, I spoke about this before, that if you lose the ability for your brain to function, the heart is still able to pump. So it's not a two-way street. It really is a one-way street, in that you need a heart for the rest of the body to survive, right? You can get away with not having the brain function, but you cannot get away without having the heart function. So anatomically, it's feeding every single tissue in our body. We know that: the blood, the nerves, the bone, the lymph, every organ. But then when we get to the sort of energetic frequencies of the heart, that's where the Heart Math Institute is putting out some pretty incredible research right now. And they've been able to determine that the heart actually is stronger magnetically than the brain. So it was previously thought that the brain was in control of the whole body and would send messages out to the tissues. What they've recorded now through ECGs is that when an emotion lights up, an emotion goes through the body, that the heart actually lights up first and sends a message to the brain, and the brain lights up second. So that's the exact opposite of what we've been believing this whole time. So that's pretty fascinating, that emotions do start there, send a message to the brain, hey, I'm stressed out. And then the brain sends that message back to the rest of the tissues saying, I'm stressed out, we need to go into flight, right? second thing they've discovered is just the actual relevance of that electromagnetic field that we've been speaking about. So first of all, what is an electromagnetic field?
Yes, take us there. Some people are going to know, but for others, it's
It's a
new territory, right?
topic, right? And it's super complex if you start going into reading about it on the internet, and it's just words and science. Going to the most basic level, because I think we all did grade 10 science. What's the smallest unit of life? That would be the atom. Yes. Yes.
Yep.
The atom is the smallest unit of life. The components of the atom is that we've got protons and neutrons sort of in that center core. And then we have the electrons cycling around the atom. That cycling electron shell is what creates energy. Okay. So stay with me.
Mm-hmm.
Every single cell in our body is made up of billions of atoms. Okay. And then we have cells that congregate to form organs. Okay. So that electromagnetic field with all the electrons cycling around it then become combined into a large magnetic field when we have organs such as the heart or the liver or the lungs. So now understanding that with the electrons cycling around, remember that atoms are most happy when they're stable and balanced, meaning that protons and electrons need to be in equal numbers. So when an atom is imbalanced, meaning it has too many electrons, so negatively charged, it will want to either give away those electrons or take up the ones around it to equalize itself. That's the happiest state that the atom is in. This is where I'm going with the horses. I think you might know is that they are always seeking balance, right? They're a prey animal. Their whole life depends on this survival. And right down to that core of their organ and their heart being so gigantic, all the electrons in their body are seeking balance, right? So when we come into this space and we're negatively charged, that horse is immediately going to feel that, and either it does one of two things. They either want to take the electrons from us, which is why sometimes therapeutically we feel so much better around them, or it's too much and they want to leave because they can't handle the amount of negative electrons around them. So that's a brief summary of sort of the relevance of the science behind it, that the electromagnetic field, it's a real thing. And it's going back to the oldest science that there is, which is just the basic atom and unit of life. So I wanted to share that because I think that's important.
Awesome. So you mentioned heart math, which if listeners have not checked that out yet, very, very cool research on heart and like the potency of the heart and the potency of developing peace within ourselves. I think they've got some amazing exercises there for human beings to develop that in ourselves. But before we kind of get back into things, I would love, so Elisse sent me some really amazing sort of facts, numbers today about the differences between horses and humans as far as this electromagnetic field. So would you mind sharing that with us before we move on?
Yeah, I would love to. So the horses are obviously much larger than us, right? So they have an electromagnetic field about 100 times the size of ours. So what that means is, if you want to just think about electron shells, if we had 5, they would have about 5,000 or 500, right? So much larger field. Second of all, because of that sheer size of their field around their heart and around their body, they can detect the electrons coming off of anything, such as prey, predators, humans, up to 5 kilometers away. Okay, our electromagnetic field is sensed about 5 feet away off our body by ECG. Theirs 5 kilometers, so it's a huge reach for them, which explains a lot of that behavior when you see them reacting to you from very far distances or reacting to each other and communicating from across the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, I think my friend Laura's horse Buzz, and there'd been a car accident, a big, like an actual horse trailer wreck, about 2.5 kilometers away from their house. And that entire day he stood at the fence and just like waited while it was happening. She's like, what is going on with him? And then heard, that this was going on, but it was not within visual sight. It was not within hearing distance. It was, it was, at least 2.5 kilometers away. And it's very common for our horses to have that sense of, so much happening. Yeah.
I mean, they're designed for that, like we were saying, because they're a prey, right? They have to be able to detect the negative energies coming towards their space. For us, the electromagnetic field serves as sort of a barrier towards negative energies and protecting our organs, right? Because you need your organs to be safe. So you need to be able to sense when there's a danger coming towards you, right? Even as a human.
Even at the top of the food chain.
Yeah.
Yeah, you think like 5 feet compared to 5 kilometers. You're like, damn, we are built for different things, hey? Anything you wanted to add in there, Josh, before we move forward?
Yeah, just the whole idea of the relevance of the atom and how it can be knocked out of balance based on how the horse is feeling and what's going on inside them really starts to communicate why it's so important to be able to meet their needs. Because when a horse's needs are not met and they feel so intently on so many scales, it can knock their balance so far out that it just drives them crazy. And then we're trying to have relationships and do stuff with them, right? So we're trying to ask them to perform and do this work for us. And without this awareness of meeting needs and actually what's going on for them anatomically, I think this really does build a case for why people get into a place where they try to dominate the horse. So they don't understand what's going on, but they still want the horse to do things, and then it's called behavior. And then we want to get after them for this bad behavior, and this just escalates the negativity of the relationships. So from a relational horsemanship perspective, the idea is that we're trying to meet these needs, and the needs being mind, space, and pressure. And each of those needs speaks specifically to the resonance that the heart is giving off, which is super cool. And as the mind need is out of balance, the horse is not able to, it sends them into a self-preserving state so fast. But from a perspective of their ability to take in the world and the need to know if they're safe in their world, when they do, it brings a calmness in them inside themselves. From a spatial perspective, as the space need, this one is the most intense heart connection, because this is actually talking about their resonance. And horses are desiring to be in good relationships spatially. So I find people become confused by this spatial connection, believing that they always have to push a horse out of your space. That it's always a respect or a disrespect thing, when so often horses are looking to create communication. And I believe that this whole knowledge that we're gaining of the heart is just going to continue to intensify, because I believe that our thoughts and our feelings and our energy all travel through. So our thoughts and our feelings travel through the energy. And the horse can actually understand our thoughts, and they can know what we're feeling and what we're thinking. And this sets a tone for how safe they feel around us. So a lot of times what horses are trying to do when they push into a human, so to speak, is that they're actually trying to draw the human out of themselves, because they're reaching to feel the human, when so many humans are locked up behind their shell. Because
I was going to say armored.
The damage of life and the challenges we faced, and we get hurt, and we get so we're guarding ourselves, trying to preserve the space we have left, so to speak, where so often horses are actually reaching in there trying to feel you. And so when we kick them out or push them away, really we're just compounding the problem. But when we can start resonating inside that space and actually opening up our own space, now you create a heart-to-heart communication. The challenge for humans is that can be slightly vulnerable.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, I literally worked with a client today who, that fear of, and I think this is the case with so many animal relationships where, what if something happens, or what if I lose them, or what if I, like there's this vulnerability in the deep heart, like connection, of like, I could get like real hurt here,
Yeah. I did want to add on to another thing I forgot to mention with the Heart Math Institute
Please.
is they proved as well that negative emotional states have more electrons. That is a proven thing.
Oh,
Positive
interesting.
emotional states have more balance in the atom. Okay, so it does speak to what Josh is saying. Just stepping into the space, and if the horse is pushing into you or not, everything that's coming out of you, they are sensing. Whether you're smiling or not, they're picking up on the electrons, right? So if you're negatively
Absolutely.
charged, but you're happy on the outside or putting on a show outside, they're not picking up on that, right? Because they're just feeling those electrons coming out of the body to a face
Yeah.
that's matching, and that's even scarier, I
I was
think.
gonna say the incongruence.
Yeah, it's
We've
completely incongruent to what they're feeling
yeah.
versus what they're seeing, and that's a huge red flag as a prey animal to leave.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's where horsemanship styles begin to kind of part ways, because you have a certain style that will kind of accept that humans don't have to give much, but then we can just try to use training aids to get the horse to do things, and that can actually promote more disconnection. So yes, we can get horses to do things, but again, the reason for I feel like for a relational style is that the idea is that as we want the horse to feel more comfortable, we have to become more open, which is a beautiful part of self-development and self-growth, because I'm going to get to a place where I want to lead my horse in something I'm already doing. I want them to become comfortable and feel like they can be at a calm frequency because they can feel it in me.
Hmm.
So this
And what's
becomes
great
very
about
challenging.
that is you can't cheat.
That's right. There's no
You sure can't.
You cannot cheat that, right? You have to feel it in yourself, and you have to get to that place in your own body before it's actually going to emanate out to the horse.
Yeah, and this is the work, this is the practice.
Yeah.
Right? Like this is where the rubber meets the road, I think,
For humans.
for many of us, because being someone who works with humans and horses, as you are as well, Elise, it's that sense of, very often the horses are pretty clear, in where
Yeah.
they're at. Generally, I mean, there can
Yeah.
be trauma and various things going on, but a lot of the times, they're pretty clear. But I think by, you know, um, a bit into human life, a lot of things have been suppressed. A lot of things have been shut down, and I can imagine that this is something that you see, Josh, in your clinics and in your in your worlds, where some of that stuff starts to surface. Um,
Well, unless a horse is totally sacked out, where they have been told they're not allowed to show how they feel,
yeah,
and that's when a horse becomes broken.
yeah, learned
Um,
helplessness. Yeah,
right. Until then, the horse is going to constantly be showing you how they feel, whether that's freaking out or whatever. They're trying to show you, where humans have kind of committed to that learned helplessness of, this is how I feel, but this is how I have to act, which becomes a massive problem in regards to building relationships with animals, because we've got one thing, as you alluded to, Elise, we've got one thing going on the outside. We've got something totally cooking differently on the inside. So when it really comes down to it, when we recognize this truth that the heart senses heart, the heart is going to feel what's going on in the other energies around you, you can get past the point where you have to start acting. And you can start recognizing that if you can just start building a clean frequency in your own being, that's going to bring greater peace to everything around you. And it's not a matter of just making the horse listen, it's about changing your inner frequency. And when you do that, you can start bringing balance to anything you touch. And that's what I call the universal language in my work, because it's now a language all things can communicate in. And the heart being so powerful, it gives opportunity for us to have such positive impact in so many ways. So when we're dealing with space, anytime we feel a horse kind of push into our space, this should be a signal for us. Because as a human, we can get so up in our brains, and we can forget that our primary voice to communicate to the world is actually through our heart.
yeah,
Because that means you are owning what you're doing. When it comes from your head, you can know it but not be it.
yeah.
And I say that very much like, scrolling through Facebook, and you see all the different quotes, and everybody believes them, but they're not necessarily being them.
Acting them, yeah.
And they want to, but it means you have to get to a place where you can free your heart. So that lies at the essence of space.
And I feel in that this catch 22, not even a catch 22, but just like this invitation, because I think so much of the dominance training that we've sort of fallen into has been able to make such a big, to be so, what would we call it, like all over the place, um, because we're not feeling, like we're not in our heart going, hey, this doesn't feel good to me. Like I don't like how I feel when I'm, forcing my horse to do something, or, you know, applying this huge amount of pressure, or, like all of those things, or not listening to the no, or whatever it is, right? And I think that takes that deep tapping into the heart and going, wow, like I feel what that actually means when I do those things, what my horse feels when I do those things.
Well, most people have been taught that they don't really know what's going on until someone tells them.
Yeah.
And whether that's the school system or whatever the reason, a lot of people don't really believe in their feel. They have no confidence there. And until we start getting more connected to our own feel, it's super hard to be able to trust that the heart call. So I call, these things that there's a sense in all of us that is calling towards relationship. We all desire it. We all want to be a part of it. But yet somebody tells us to do something with our horse, and we listen because they're supposed to be the smart one that knows everything, and I don't. And the beautiful part about this, which I think is the invitation to everyone listening, is when you begin this work, is to just trust that all of us are innately built with a heart that desires peace. And when you're in any kind of a frequency that's not producing it, your heart will be hollering at you. It'll be calling you, and you'll feel the irregularities of it. And I feel like that's the heartbeat of relational horsemanship, is that we're trying to allow every moment to teach us more about what it means to bring peace to a space. And the more we can listen to our hearts and we can feel what is creating, and that's the beauty of it as science, it's not even opinion anymore, to recognize that when you take the heart out of balance and you're not giving it what it needs, it's going to be imbalanced and you're going to feel a change. And when you bring it to peace, it's going to have there's going to be a different balance in the actual atom. And then that electrical frequency in the heart is actually proving now that's real.
Yeah. And furthermore, looking at the specific anatomy in the heart itself and thinking about how the heart actually gets the blood through the body. I mean, as a real quick sort of summary, it's, coming up from an inferior vena cava, so coming up the vein, going into the ventricle, passing to atria, passing to the lungs to get oxygen. So there's this flow through the heart itself, all these that has to go to get back out of the body. But those phases are regulated by really specific pressure barometers, right? And so what happens with the horses and us, when you send them into a sympathetic state, those pressure barometers go nuts, because now the heart is needing to constrict as much as it can to get as much blood out, because that horse is preparing to run. So even at that anatomical level, when you're adding pressure from a horsemanship perspective, you're actually adding physical pressure as well to the heart valves, right? And I think it's
absolutely
to think about that parallel, that you're actually causing that pressure within the heart, as well as magnetically around, that we just talked about, but physically too. And you're seeing it play out in those body postures of, when you do add too much pressure, and if you don't retract that in time, the horse will continue into that flight state. And you see the back going up, the ribs opening, as you discussed earlier podcast.
The head going up.
Yeah.
This is where often you'll see like the equipment coming on, right? The martingales and the the things like, gotta get their head down, gotta get, yeah.
Like it all came from that initial sort of pressure where the heart picked up on this and said, I need to prepare to run, maybe. Right?
Absolutely. Well, and I'm assuming as well, I mean, it's coming to me because, I know for my mare, she's like big girl, drafty. And when she gets stressed, that shoulder gets locked. And it makes total sense because of the pressure coming into the heart, right? Like that sense, she's just, it's hard to kind of, the flow leaves, that
Yeah.
flexibility leaves the body, because she's in this space of, I've got to protect myself
Yeah.
here in whatever way I can, yeah.
Yeah, so there's two sort of, in my opinion, effects. There's like an energetic flow disruption as well as an actual physical flow disruption. They're
Mm,
happening at the same time, and it's hard for humans to pick up on that. The energetic part, right? But the
yeah,
physical part is pretty obvious because we can see it in front of us.
yeah. And I'm only I have to make this leap that a horse that is consistently and sympathetic, especially within the heart, is going to break down a lot faster than one that isn't.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about that last time with a sustained sympathetic state.
Yeah.
I mean, in humans, that's kind of known as stress, right? We're
Like,
under a lot of
yeah.
stress, and people that are stressed tend to,
And overwhelmed and
yeah,
exhausted.
overwhelmed. They're fatigued, then they get lethargic, their adrenals get tired, their cortisol goes through the roof, right? It's no different with the horses. They have the same hormones as us. Unfortunately for them, they're also living in
Yeah.
not ideal situations all the time, right?
Yeah.
In different confinement. So that's already unnatural. Then you're adding a stress to the body. The hormones are flying through the roof, right? And unfortunately, it shows up like other things in blood work and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I think we all know that a sustained sympathetic or stressed state is not great for the system as a whole, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Can lead to lots of different breakdowns within that system. Yeah.
Mm.
Which we got into a little bit last time for sure. If you
Mhm.
haven't listened to Elise and Josh's previous podcast, definitely go back and check them out. I wanted to, there was a segue way back, and I got into other things, but this sense of, emotion. I think in a lot of humans, it's sort of a classic human trait, like we were talking about, to try to sort of deny our emotions or try to be like happy when we're really not. And horses, it's a much more kind of, this is where I'm at, a much more real picture of what's going on. So how do emotions and the heart sit together? What, what's the relationship there?
Well, I think just something that I want to add before we talk to that is
Please.
just in regards to the pressure piece.
Yeah.
So I see that there's a balance of what I call predator pressure and herd pressure. And so a predator pressure would be a pressure that would create all of these negative stimulations.
Yep.
So if in our training we do not help horses to understand how to process pressure more relationally, then you can't actually add a pressure that doesn't cause these negative impacts on the body.
Right.
So what a predator pressure style will do is when pressure is elevated, it will create negative effects and it will always create reactive emotions. So I've began calling these, because emotions aren't necessarily bad in themselves, but the reactive emotions are the ones that are more guarded and defensive and produce negative impacts on our bodies and our relationships. And a relational pressure, or a herd pressure, you might call it, is a space where the horses already want to be together. They already have a desire to be together. So their pressure is more so about communication and connectivity about their relationships. Now, as people, we are granted predator pressure by default because they don't necessarily want to be with us initially, nor do they have a desire to be. So when we step into their lives and we start trying to get them to do things, they will immediately think of being guarded. So if we exist in a predator pressure state, when we want them to move, we increase. And when it comes too big, we retract. Because we're locked into the belief that they are going to run when we get big, and if we want them to not get big, we have to back away or get small. But that has a very negative impact on the energetic field we give off. So spatially, we now vacate the space. So in my work, that's where I've now kind of evolved my function of pressure to actually stay very open in my space, let the horse feel me. But any pressure that I apply has to be released on two relational phases. So the first is that when I apply pressure, they can control the pressure by what they do with their mind. So if they think about me or they connect with me mentally, I'll take the pressure away. So what that does is that draws their mind and their feel back to what I'm giving off.
Mm.
The second is that when I connect to the pressure, I want to feel some form of release within them. So I don't push on that very hard, but it's this idea that if I connect with my lead rope and I ask a horse, I get them to a place where they understand when I touch the rein, it means let go. Then when I apply a little pressure, they understand that that's a complement to that. So pressure, that they can deal with pressure based on releasing something or committing to it mentally. And that really starts to change the function of pressure and the emotions they release. So it all kind of ties together for me as the final need in this piece, is to say we need to be able to first help our horses understand how to process pressure differently, so we can actually have a functional conversation where
Mm-hmm.
we can use pressure as a function but not as a negativity. And again, it has dramatic effects on the heart.
What Josh is talking about is reminding me so much of like a human practice of, meditation or yoga or diaphragmatic breathing. It's sort of how humans have learned to bring their own heart rates down or bring their own emotional states down. And I think that that's really interesting, that the way that Josh is describing that, because it's almost like teaching your horse how to do some diaphragmatic breathing.
Oh, absolutely. To me, it sounds like like teaching them self-regulation,
Yeah.
teaching them resiliency within, because, I often get trapped here too, is like, with my horses, like I want to give them the skills that if something happens to me, like they're going to be okay, which means that there needs to be some training. There needs to be, they need to be able to handle some pressure, some stress, potentially, right? And there's situations where, you're seeing, like in Australia with the fires, it's like, okay, you got to get on the trailer. Like, we need to do this now. Like, and so does my horse have the resiliency in their heart and their body and their nervous system to be able to actually be with me in those moments, be in the trust of that. So I really appreciate that piece, Josh, because I think that often we kind of go into this and or,
Yeah,
I'm
that's
either I'm either like dominance training, like all in, or I'm like totally passive,
yeah, I see
where's
it
that
all.
middle ground, right?
Well, and this is again where the heart resonance comes into play. By being totally passive, we're not empowering them to become powerful in the world. And from dominance, we're pretty much taking anything they had away.
Yeah.
So the power in it is when we can really resonate with the feel, and we can remove ourselves from, because a lot of people, they build the base of what they do based on the negatives they don't desire. So I'm never gonna use a bit because I saw someone use it in a certain way, or I'm never gonna use this, or I'm always gonna use this because I saw someone use it well. For me, it's entirely about building a base around developing first a relationship, but then understanding connectively how each thing is used to create more relational connection. And so as we empower our horses to become deeper thinkers and process pressure, you're actually increasing the vibration, and it becomes more and more powerful. And I believe this is what creates power. So when we think of confidence, we think of confidence within ourselves. Confidence grows as we intensify our own belief behind something. And that's, in my mind, increasing, as Elise would say, the protons inside of the atom are now just beaming, because you have a depth inside of a pure resonance. So as we can get to that place where our pressure can actually impact that, then now we're talking about relational pressure. So you have kind of three different spaces. You have predator pressure, you have the natural herd dynamic pressure, and now we have a relational pressure. So what ends up happening is that the horses will respond to pressure in any way they can kind of control it. So if they can control it by intensifying and bringing balance to their heart frequency, they would much prefer doing that than by running.
Yeah, then by escalating. Yeah.
It's very different than like old school sort of like pressure release straight up tactics. Like that works, but it's not quite for the same reasons what Josh is describing, right? That there's a lot more relation to what he's doing. So I like that.
Yeah, there's a lot more depth and nuance.
Yeah.
For sure.
There's much more intention behind that. And I think that it resonates so much better with the anatomy that we're talking about, and why That's why I reached out to you in the first place, because I just felt like that really made sense. That's why you get the results, right?
Well, the pressure release idea still agrees with the self-preserving nature of pressure, the predator pressure style. So, but will still, and that's where it contradicts your work, because then when you apply the pressure, they're going to move away, but they're moving away in attention. They're going to move away in an anxiety.
Yeah.
So you're getting them to move, and that's where I think passivity comes, because people, it's like, man, I just don't want them to feel that way when they move. So I want to do nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's often this pendulum shift, you know, where it's like, I don't want them to feel like that and get tense every time I do something and leave every time I get the halter out. You know, maybe I'll just do nothing.
That's right. And
right.
Sometimes it's better for sometimes in the beginning until you process the new thought. But again, I think that's really where the idea. So relational horsemanship, from my perspective, is I'm trying to do things at their highest level as I possibly can. Now, it is a little bit more of a challenge because you can't just plow your way through it. You can't smash your way through it and just take what you want. You have to earn it. But is that not like relationship? And in my mind, everything on this earth, and again, the cool thing about Elisse's work with the heart is that the heart is already telling us. The heart's already telling us when there is a deep resonance and when there's not. When something works, you're going to have this scientific proof that it will work. So it really cuts the cloth on horsemanship in my mind, because now it's like, no, not everything is going to work, because we can't just plow our way through it if we're going to honor the true being that we're trying to deal with. So for me, I think that's wonderful, because it starts to allow just a deeper conviction behind this whole relational approach in my mind.
Yeah, and I mean, it starts showing up in their body as well down the road. In terms of, you start seeing restrictions in movement and mobility issues.
I was going to say,
they start to pile up when the horse is constantly, let's say, in a sympathetic state during X training sessions, right?
Yep.
Going even deeper into it was the final point with the heart itself. And I wanted to let everybody know about the heart roll and how fascinating that is, because I'm seeing a lot of that with horses that are trained predominantly with a sort of like standard pressure release. Mm-hmm. And what I'm seeing is that the heart is becoming stuck a little bit. So for those listeners that don't know, as the heart is beating, it actually rolls. So it'll beat, beat, beat. For 3 beats, it's sort of rolling forward. Then as it's coming back, 1, 2, 3 beats, it's sort of rolling back. The purpose of the heart roll is that it encourages greater arterial, so blood out, or greater venous return, blood back in. So as it's rolling forward, yes, it's still going in and out of arterial venous, but the focus is into the arterial direction. As it's rolling backwards, its focus is in that filling, so taking up all the rest of the blood in the body that needs to get out and get new oxygen. But what happens is, when the horse is in a sustained sympathetic state, that heart will get stuck in that arterial phase. And then you start to see this sort of cascade effect through the blood vessels in the region. So right up the neck to the pole, down the shoulder, in the brachial plexus area, so behind the shoulder, that's where I'm seeing that shoulder is locked down around that down.
Oh yeah.
On the left, because the heart is situated left, right? So I've seen enough cases now that it's another thing that I'm pondering of, is this because of that sustained sympathetic state, right?
Oh my gosh, I just learned something today. I'm so excited. I'm
glad.
Just having a moment here. My inner geek is very happy. I just actually I've worked on so many horses recently, and my noticing is the number of sheared and compacted sternums, which makes me go, oh,
yeah.
And the lack of mobility in the ribs.
Yeah.
Which, of course, coming back to Josh's initial point, biomechanically impacts the way that the horse is able to, like, even move their hind limb, move the shoulder, hold a rider,
Yeah,
so
from my perspective, without met needs, the body's not even available. The horse cannot create availability in their being, so they lock down into a self-preserving state to actually preserve their body for their own self-preservation. So the only thing they can do is argue with you or fight with you because they feel like you're missing the point.
yeah,
I can't give you my body because I'm in a place where I might need to protect myself.
I do not feel safe.
Yeah.
So once their needs are met, then they actually release even a bigger frequency, which allows you to feel them better and deepens your connection. But now the muscles, I call them the defensive muscles. So the defensive muscles would predominantly be the top line.
Yep.
And the relational muscles would be their underline. But the relational muscles, like the longus coli predominantly and the loin, would be the activated muscles when a horse is in a state of relationship. And the top line, the big muscles along the top, are the ones that will activate when the horse is in a state of anxiety, which will impact what you're talking about, the sternum, even more. When the top line fires, it drops the base of the neck. And so then from a relational perspective, again, it's compounding the physicality. So if the horse is constantly in a negative state, then their bodies cannot work right. So the beauty of this is that it honors the high calling of relationship, which is that unless you meet the needs, you don't get the physicality. And that is a relational truth along the board. Without a deep connection to the needs, you can't have the body, So you're meeting the needs, and then the horse brings themselves to the table.
I feel like Josh is giving me relationship advice.
Well,
because it translates over everything, right? Like human relationships, all these things. It's the same stuff, right?
It's only when we divide it in certain areas that we can then kind of get away with breaking truths. So we look at horses and we say, well, they're different, so I can use pressure to make them do stuff. But would you ever consider having a good relationship with someone by handling them some of the ways we would train a horse? It doesn't even make any sense. But because we separate it from a universal truth, so again, I try to live by those.
That reminds me of like having a friend who is just badgering you up the mountain too. If you're like, my ankle hurts, they're like, suck it up, let's go. But you're like, no, but my ankle like really hurts. It's like, yeah, stop being a baby, right? But like, what would you be friends with that person for the rest of your life? Maybe not, right?
I'm gonna go with no.
It doesn't feel very good when you're not being heard, right? Just from a friendship level. So
absolutely, I think there's lots there for sure, and just that sense of, like if I was being bullied into doing something, that my tension would be through the roof around that. I also wouldn't feel safe. And I really I want to come back to that point you just made, Josh, is like how we try to justify how we're doing things by kind of separating it out. Horses are different, they don't operate like humans, like all this sort of stuff. But like it's actually not true. It's a universal truth that like all the beings are in this space of wanting to be relational, and horses are high up on that list of social engagement and community. Like that's what they crave and what keeps them safe.
Totally.
Yeah.
Don't forget, we're also made up of atoms as humans, right? So I think a lot of us, it's hard, you lose sight of that primal sort of stuff, with busy life and city and work and all the things that go with human life. But at the core of it, we too have those exact same sort of energetic needs, right? For the balance.
Yeah.
And I think that's why a lot of us, if you're more sensitive to it, you really do pick up on that when you've been in a sustained stress state. There's sometimes you just want to be alone or you want to have space, right?
Yeah.
That's why. It's because we too seek that balance. I think we just forgotten about it sometimes. But
yeah, I love that too, because I think for us and the listeners, all of you out there, I do wonder how often in humans a part of the sort of crux of what we're dealing with right now in terms of this change that we're making. We're seeing it reflected in horsemanship and how we're showing up in our partnerships, but I think there's a deeper issue at hand in that as humans, we are not taught to understand or ask for what we need.
or even know or be at all connected to it.
have any connection to it. I mean, this I think is the heart connection, is you have to be connected to your heart to understand what your deeper needs are. You know, there's obviously the basic survival needs, like, you know, I need to eat something every day, you know, I gotta drink water, you know, it's nice to have a roof over the head, you know, but there's this deeper sense of like of the needs that really fulfill us.
We talk about it based on feel, but you know, with the Elise had mentioned earlier that the heart actually comes before the brain, and but then that's shocking to us because we have put the brain on the throne of our being, and anything that's not rationally, you know, clear isn't real. But yet, from this work, the heart would see that I believe that our feeling, the feeling has to become clear, and as the feeling becomes clear, words and material starts coming to the feeling as we let the heart and the brain work together. And this is super important when you're listening to a horse, to understand what they're trying to communicate to you, because they will be giving you a feel, and slowly that feel will start to materialize as a word if you let the brain and the heart honor each other instead of one overpower the other. And that's where it's all balance, you know. So again, when you just bring it all together, you have a desire for peace in a body that needs to function a certain way. So the high calling of good horsemanship is to bring as much peace as you can to the mind and the body, and then allow the body to work in the right function. But they don't function outside of each other. If there's no peace, the needs aren't met, the horse cannot function physically. And if a horse is not functioning as their physical body should, it's hard for them to have peace. Thus, sometimes the reason for therapy before horsemanship, and sometimes horsemanship before therapy. So I do a work kind of body mapping. It's just this idea where we start defining the aids to inner release. Because a lot of times what happens is you guys you'll adjust a horse, then someone picks up a rein, and that brings back the old negative belief. Mm-hmm. So then the horse gets anxious, tightens physically, and walks away and
right back into sympathetic state.
There it goes.
And their adjustment goes away. Yeah. So there has to be a beautiful marriage, so to speak, between defining the aids and how the horse interprets them to sustain therapy, and then for the therapy to work with how the aids are being defined. So it's very important. And again, this all resonates. How do you know when it's right? It resonates off the heart speaking to you if you can listen.
Yeah, absolutely. And that comes from cultivating a sense of what peace is within yourself, I think.
You betcha.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. And there's a whole conversation, Lex, that we could dive into on
that.
Oh
my gosh. There's a few tangents here. I'm like, okay. Absolutely. We only have like 5 minutes left, of course. So, you know, I definitely want to, I know that we didn't talk specifically about the mind space pressure horses, but we did talk, you know, somewhat about those pieces today. That might need to be a different conversation, but if there's anything that you two would like to kind of share in that vein of thought, you know, as we start to wrap up today.
I think that kind of, I think it leads us to kind of, because we haven't actually given a lot of insight about what we've actually done, but Elisse and I we're working on writing a paper together. At this point,
it's fantastic.
Yeah. An article. But we don't actually know, because it's taking on more and more life as we continue to collaborate our information. Mm-hmm. So in time, we will be releasing something that shares this collaborated information for people to be able to read or listen to. And so that will be, I'm sure we'll be getting to that. You know, we're still working on it. We're still putting it together, but it continues to grab more life. When it initially was supposed to be a simple article, it's now continuing to grow and bloom into something much bigger. So we're just trying to honor that, which is why it hasn't been released already. And as it materializes more, we'll just keep people posted on what that's going to look like. Yes. So we have talked a little bit in there about mind horses, space horses, and pressure horses, and then how that infuses into the heart. But this is a great culmination of the concepts, more in verbal.
Yeah, a little bit more of an overview, and the article is going more and more in depth into sort of each category that we went through today, right?
Mm-hmm.
As Josh is saying, it keeps growing. As the research around the heart keeps growing, I keep adding more because there's just so much fascinating work being done right now by so many incredible researchers around the world. And I keep finding new things. I'm like, I gotta add that. I gotta add that because I just really want everyone to have the opportunity to see all this information too, right?
Yes, yes, and I think it's so critical, to start to bridge these gaps, to start to kind of go, oh, like there's a reason for this way of being, and it's not just like
Yeah, it's
someone
not just fluff
going,
or that's
yeah,
fun
you should try
environment.
this, it's like, oh, there's some substance behind it, um, which is really really helpful for a lot of us. Hmm. Awesome. Anything you wanted to share that we're missing about the heart, Miss Elise?
Um, I think that the last thing I sort of wanted to add and just remind people because it's so far since I've started studying this and talking with my own clients about what I've been finding, I find like a lot of the horse people asking sort of the same questions like, well, how do I implement this daily? Or how do I start to try to understand my horse's heart? And so I think it's important to share at the most simplest level, going back to that atom and
Yeah.
what we know about the energy around the atom. So your thoughts become intentions, right? And intentions become emotions, and we now know that those emotions carry an energetic charge. Okay, so whether you believe it or not, you can start with a thought. So I've been saying that to a lot of my clients is that it doesn't matter, if you don't know what's wrong with your horse, specifically, that they're in pain somewhere, but you have to go out with that intention. So just set your intention that I want to find out what is wrong with you, and I'm open and listening, and see what happens. It's
Hmm.
fascinating. I've changed my approach with my clients now into sort of a more intentional approach, I guess, like
Yeah.
what I was just saying, and sort of just asking the horses and leaving it a little more open ended. And I'm getting a lot different feedback from them than I previously did.
Well, I love that because, it takes it back to this space of, and I think Josh kind of you brought this forward as well, is that the body has an innate wisdom within it, that knows what it needs, and so when we bring that intention of like, how can I help, how can I be of assistance, how can I be
Yeah,
of service, whether it's training or therapeutically or otherwise, that allows that horse to show up in a really different way. And maybe, I've had horse clients that have blown me away. I remember one particular incident, and it seems like magic now. I look back and I'm like, did that really happen? And I was standing in a round pen, and the round pen was in this paddock with about 10 horses, and the horses just lined up. They just walked up, and they placed the body part that was needing to be helped in front of me, and it was like a line of about 4 or 5 horses,
yeah,
and then I would do a little work, and they'd be like, cool, and
yeah,
they would go, and this is all of their own volition, so when
yeah,
we allow a horse to express from the heart what they're needing, like, and be open about that, and be open to that, it
yeah,
it can really change what shows up for us.
yeah. The
And that
intention piece is a pretty powerful
it is.
piece, and shocking to me, even 15 years of practice now, and I'm sort of just starting to realize the magnitude of that piece. And just what you're saying, I've been having a lot of horses pointing now and just actually showing me exactly where the discomfort is, and that's not something that I ever had them doing before. And it's not my own horses, these are clients' horses, and just by opening up, they're pointing at their hock or pointing at their belly or whatever it is, right? And yeah, it's just fascinating.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love hearing that, and I hope our listeners, for those of you out there, just be open to what coolness might occur with your horses. Yeah, anything that to finish up there, Josh?
Well, I feel like the heart energy would be the feel we discuss so heavily in horsemanship, is the conduit or the medium with which thoughts travel. And that is why not being in a self-preserving state is the key to good relationship, because then we can communicate. So you girls are visiting on that regarding therapy. So you bring a calm center and a healing hand, and you release that in your heart frequency, and then it can be felt, and beings that can sense that then align themselves to the moment. For me, what horses do is they will do that from a training perspective, or they'll show me something that I can add value to. And that's the real beauty of it, is that this is really one of the reasons for stillness in us, where the meditative practice of stillness becomes so
Mm-hmm.
important, because you need to get to a place where you can center yourself so that you can allow your intentions to travel through your heart frequency to connect with other beings. But when we're in a self-preserving state, this is impossible
Oh
by
yeah.
the entire existence of our being, whether it's the heart biology, or whether it's the feeling, the frequency, the needs, or the physicality. So for intention to travel, we must have our needs met, so we're not in a preserving state, a self-preserving state. The horse is the same, and when you bring those two beings together, that's when deep relationship is possible, and there is a deeper communication that allows relationship to thrive.
Damn.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. Wisdom bomb. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You don't disappoint, Josh. That was awesome. I love chatting with you too. It's so fun. And really, illuminating, which is my favorite. So thank you both for being here today. Yeah.
That's been always, it's been great, and it's always a pleasure, Alexa.
Oh, yeah, ditto. And for all those out there listening in, mucking your paddocks, doing your thing, thank you for tuning in today, taking the time to listen and learn with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thanks so much. Have a great day.